So I'd like to talk particularly today about science and special collections. And libraries and special collections are integral to the study of the past, and they serve as repositories for primary sources, as you know, in a variety of different forms. And as lately, they've become a platform for digitization of primary sources, which of course enhances access and makes it possible to work with sources at a remove from the originals and without any inherent limitations on the number of users. And our focus on primary sources and inquiry-based learning, research and information literacy, and the availability of digitized materials has fundamentally altered how we teach and study history. But special collections need not be tied exclusively to the study of history as a discipline, and although it's surely the discipline that has been most inclined to make use of these materials. The diversity of users in many special collections, including ours at the Denver Public Library and the Western History Genealogy Department, is simply absolutely remarkable. We have, of course, historians, and we have genealogists. But we also have urban planners, architects, landscape architects, studio and visual artists, community members interested in homes and neighborhoods, and a range of ages and avocations and interests that is truly remarkable. But why not science? One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is extending support for users who are interested in the sciences, engineering, medicine, and mathematics, and a connection to what we often refer to as science, technology, engineering, math, the so-called STEM disciplines. And it need not be the case that the collections that you be using be absolutely associated with these particular disciplines. And there are surprising collections that afford opportunities for the study of the sciences. With study, reflection, and a little bit of inspiration and collaboration, there are a host of opportunities, remarkable opportunities to engage science students, instructors, librarians, and maybe even a few derelict historians who like the sciences. Moreover, there's a really interesting opportunity to explore a creative common ground between history and sciences, to bring together important insights from diverse disciplines, and develop some really interesting and I think transferable skills for information literacy, which is something that I think leaps immediately to the hearts of many historians when we work and collaborate with librarians, because we feel that that discipline of history is something that's almost naturally connected with information literacy. But I would suggest that science is not very different as well. Now, I could talk particularly about STEM subjects today, but I wanted to focus particularly on the life sciences because I think that's a very ready opportunity. And I'll simply make a few observations about the past use of our collections and just make some suggestions not only from what we've used and presented with materials, but also some examples from the Library of Congress, almost exclusively from the Library of Congress. Well, a little bit of the American Philosophical Society's library gets tossed in as well. And I'd just like to particularly, for example, talk about railroads. You all have students who would be passionately devoted to technology that would look something like that. Does anyone have the slightest idea what that is? Have you ever reflected on the problem of turning a railroad engine around and heading it in a different direction? This is a turntable. This is a turn machinery. And one can imagine the kind of fascination with this kind of technology and how it would inspire students, a range of ages, a range of notions of things. I should warn you, however, that railroad aficionados can sometimes become a little devoted. You probably know a few people in the room. I can see smiles and nods in some corners. They refer to themselves as foamers because they sort of foam at the mouth at these opportunities. See, I wasn't going to talk about rabies and being rabid. What a metaphor. We're going to just continue with that. But there's also an extraordinary number of opportunities. For example, I mean, we do have, of all darn things, an aviation collection, our Ross Barrett Aviation Collection, which is interested in the 18th and 19th century and non-motorized flight. I don't know if I would trust this necessarily as a tool for parachutes, but wouldn't it be awfully interesting to use some of these schematics as an opportunity to create experiments to see if these would work, admittedly in miniature and perhaps only with figures made of Lego as a possibility. There are a host of possibilities there for students to explore. Students of technology can also find an extraordinary array of publications from mining engineering, from publications in the hard sciences, the so-called physical sciences, that would be extraordinarily interesting. There are also really interesting interconnections between technology and the sciences and the way it has a social implication and impact. Consider, for example, the transformation of the night, the way that electricity and nightlife in an urban setting is transformed first by gas lighting and then prospectively by these interesting and ubiquitous lights that we have, and how all of a sudden night need not be a source of terror. But then again, some things are really quite terrifying that we take for granted. The terror of milk. Come and read, for example, Denver Municipal Facts and all about the adulteration of milk with chalk. The adulteration of milk with chalk, or the prospect of all sorts of infection and the transmission of disease. Oh, come on now, pasteurization? Oh, look at this, Louis Pasteur. I wasn't going to talk about rabies. There's Pasteur again. All right. And the elimination of typhoid and cholera. I had a phone call one day from Tulane University, and it was an interesting question. Could you tell us when you adopted the English Southland method of water filtration? And I was like, probably. Give us a moment or two. Yeah, in fact, what they were doing was correlating typhoid and cholera outbreaks in Denver to the water filtration methods that were being used. Think back, now, next time you take a sip of water, reflect on the fact that it doesn't really have much body to it, which was not the case. This was an extraordinary place of cholera and typhoid well into the 20th century. Let's carry on, shall we? Couple of directions. I really think there are effectively two directions for this engagement of primary sources, historical collections, special collections, and the science. One is, I think, obviously an exploration of the history of science, which is salutary not only for understanding the development of scientific knowledge, but I think it becomes a really wonderful way to explore what we could think about as scientific information literacy. And in particular, I think that with that, so many special collections will have an extraordinarily extensive back catalog of science publications that afford opportunities for teachers to explore the historical development of a particular area of inquiry. And is so often the case, especially if you're dealing with material that was published in the United States before 1923, public domain and the wonder of digitization. So the exploration of the history of science really is something that I think immediately leaps and becomes almost a natural for us to explore. You know, all sorts of opportunities then to also explore, not merely through science publications, but through, say, for example, newspapers. Fascinated with electricity, fascinated with the wonder of phlogiston. Look it up. But electricity for, cures, electricity for, illuminating the night, electricity that could do all sorts of different and galvanizing things. Electricity, galvanic. And great opportunities to explore what is also incredibly contentious. Competing schools of thought, different hypotheses and theories. What madness is this notion of atomic particles? I'm terribly sorry, but anybody who imagines that there isn't ether in the vacuum of, filling the vacuum of space, all these things that are contested very angrily and very pointedly through the course of this is a really wonderful way to begin to think about engaging literacy, the assumptions, the ideas, not as something that's ahistorical, where people are, I think, sometimes tempted to look at the history of science and past scientific inquiry as quaint or misguided or irrelevant. It reminds students that there was a context that should be explored. And it really gives us a wonderful opportunity to explore the competitive nature of scientific inquiry, indeed even the combative nature of scientists arguing with each other as a process that it actually really does generate extraordinary passion, and not just light, but heat in that exploration. Truly remarkable to interrogate those sources, those assumptions, those ideas. But I honestly think that the more interesting thing to do with primary sources is to make them part of scientific inquiry. And that's principally, I think, naturally comes with exploring the life and environmental sciences, especially the question of the transformation of natural environments and opportunities to look, for example, at a region or a place's flora and fauna and its transformation. Because so often that's based upon a juxtaposition of a past and a present, or at least some series of representations of a particular place and the kinds of species, be they plant or be they animal, that live and thrive or disappear or enter. These are questions that are also not things that are esoteric when you start to explore the science past, because it often begins to engage almost immediately the science present, and it has profound implications for policy and politics. You probably all think I'm going to talk about climate change, right? No, I'm going to talk about fish, and I'm going to talk about trout. Let us take, for example, really one of those great symbols of the Rocky Mountain West, the rainbow trout. Yes? Ah, good. Yes. Which is, in fact, so often used to evoke a pristine past, a natural environment, a return to nature, and a species natural to Colorado, deserving of preservation. In fact, the darn thing is almost entirely synthetic. Rainbow trout are not native to Colorado. They are not even native to most of the states of the American West. And if you have ever read a historical description of aircraft flying in low over Lake Tahoe, and then opening their bomb bay doors, and literally dropping fish, live fish, to seed these lakes, as was done not only throughout the United States, but literally around the world. This is prospectively one of the most successful species on the planet. Put aside the cockroaches or even ourselves, it may be this entirely synthetic fish, as Anders Halvorsen has described it. An absolutely extraordinary way to think about how an animal utterly non-native has transformed the West. So when you go out to defend the rainbow trout, there are not clear species, or the species is very difficult genetically to identify, as Halvorsen points out, and finding original or pristine populations, problematic too. Same thing with American bison, but that's another conversation. There are other books that are absolutely extraordinary for their exploration of primary sources and the sciences that I think are fabulous inspirations. Halvorsen's one. This is Richard A. Minich's California's Fading Wildflowers. Absolutely fantastic in terms of the way that it takes a set of assumptions about what California wildflowers and flora looked like, and absolutely turns it on its ears by exploring primary sources. And that becomes a great occasion to juxtapose your flora and fauna as it's described in primary sources in a particular location, and then make it part of an ongoing fieldwork. But then again, we've already talked about cholera and typhoid, so let's do it again. The ghost map. This is Dr. John Snow, and this is London. And this is what happens when you don't have plumbing that is particularly protective of the sources of water. Dr. Snow maps death. And what Dr. Snow does is he discovers that there's a well, and then he takes the handle off the well, and the cholera and typhoid stops. This is a thematic map, and there are extraordinary opportunities to explore and map death. Influenza, typhoid, cholera, rabies. I wasn't going to talk about rabies, Peggy, I'm sorry. That you can do with the primary sources that are readily available to you, both at the Library of Congress, online, and with local collections. So let's talk just very briefly, because I've got 1 red minute that's counting down, and talk particularly just very briefly about sources. You are silly with them. They are everywhere. Diaries and letters, journals that describe environments and landscapes that provide clues about the number, nature, and the dispersion of species. Lee Whittisley, who's one of the park historians for Yellowstone, has just done bison and bison sightings to talk about the nature and extent of those particular herds. Not only do you not have to stick with a sort of wild or nature environment, but you can also begin to explore urban environments and watch invasive animals come and go, and invasive plant species too. I will not talk about, for example, because now I'm going to talk about 150,000 pigeons poisoned in Denver as part of an eradication program in the 1960s that then appears in an extraordinary source, the National Catholic Animal Register, a Catholic animal advocacy group. Lots of fun and possibilities. Maps it. I know there's a theme here, isn't there? Well, common threads. I'll try not to foam at the mouth. All sorts of possibilities, wonderful students from Odyssey who have explored the Platte River through paintings and sketches, incredible opportunities to even look online. Meriwether Lewis. I often refer to them as Nutty and Clark, but I'll give Nutty his due today. Here he is. This is the American Philosophical Society and an image from one of the codexes. All of that material online, and in fact, Gary Moulton's beautiful edition of the Lewis and Clark papers. University of Nebraska-Lincoln published it in multiple volumes, and it's all online. All of it, and a lot of University of Nebraska publications that go with it. So, lastly, because I'm 2 minutes over now and somebody's going to stare me off the deck, don't wave me away. Remember, this is a collaboration. For goodness sakes, walk up to the librarians. It's not just history that they're interested in. It's not just a past, and it's not just those sort of staid topics of historical discourse. I would love to give you the opportunity to explore the social history of the machine gun, the screwdriver, the history of indoor plumbing, and maybe even rabies. Okay.